welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, my co-host Justin Baker, joining me via Skype as we just jump right into what's happening across the NHL. Huge trades, signings, what have you. I think we would be amiss if we didn't just jump right in and talk about the Matthew Tkachuk deal. But before we do that, I just want to say hi to you, Justin. Hi.
Aw, hi, Mark.
I know, I'm giving you a virtual hug right now.
Oh, I'm giving you a virtual fist bump. So
okay. Well, does that mean that as I like came in for the hug, I just got punched in the face? Then, kind of what happened?
Just an awkward, like one guy goes in for the handshake, another for the fist bump, and you just keep going back and forth.
I love it. Well, okay. So this Brady Tkachuk, not Brady Tkachuk. Brady Tkachuk. I mean, he's a great guy. But we're not going to talk too much Brady Tkachuk. Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, he comes right out and says it. I think based on what happened with Huberdeau, I think he saw that and went, I can't dick around. I got to just I got to just say what I say. And I know they came out and they said, oh, this had nothing to do with Huberdeau. I totally buy that. I don't think that him leaving was actually contingent on Huberdeau. I think it was more about the fact that he just didn't want to be in not just Calgary. I don't think he wanted to be in Canada. So I think, and when you see the list of teams that were on the potential for him, you can tell he did not want to be. He didn't even want to like experience winter. Like as a fair. Well, I know he was up for St. Louis, which Midwest, but based on where he definitely landed. He obviously is having no issues with moving to Florida. But your first reaction to the deal?
I mean, my first reaction was, what a return haul that Brad Treliving got for the Calgary Flames, given that I don't want to say his hand was forced because he didn't have to trade him. They could have gone to arbitration and, locked him up for a year and then try to figure it out. So it's not like he had to make the move now. They still had till August to figure it out. But I think given what he was able to get in return, that's rather impressive. I mean, regardless whether or not you think Huberdeau and Uyghur are going to stay, he can still flip those two assets for even more stuff. So it's rather impressive. And, I mean, look, you had Huberdeau, who was the number 2 scorer in the NHL last year with 115 points, tied with Johnny Gaudreau. So we can call him, Johnny Hubie. I don't know. What do you want to
Shut up.
Give him a new nickname up there. But, I mean, and then, of course, Matthew Tkachuk was the 8th top scorer in the NHL at 104 points. So you virtually, I don't remember the last time we had a couple 100-point players swapping places.
No, yeah, I mean,
yeah,
or not even like go beyond the 100 points. Just 2 players who were in the top 5 of scoring.
Yeah. It's crazy, right? I mean, right? Most teams, when you have a guy who's top 10, top 5 in scoring, you're like, frick you, I'm not getting rid of him. Like,
right.
You can never get enough in return to make up for that loss. Like, it just never happens. I don't care how good you think you are. It rarely ever happens, right? So as a GM for Calgary, who's, I don't want to say hands were tied, but he was kind of, pushed to the edge a little bit in terms of just, you got to do something, right? You just lost Johnny Hockey. Your fan base knows Tkachuk's leaving. He's almost out the door. So you got to give him something positive. And I think he did a great job getting back Huberdeau, Uyghur, a prospect, and a first-round pick to boot. So he got 4 really good pieces, in my opinion. I mean,
when you look at ultimately what they get, Cole Schwint, was he a second-round pick for the Panthers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, and a second-round pick last year. So, 2 years ago, right? So, I mean, he's somebody who's ready to probably step in. 2019, I'm sorry. He's a 3rd-round pick in 2019. So, wrong all the way around. Somebody sitting at home like, no, dude, Q, I'm turning this off because you're an idiot. 2019 NHL draft, 3rd-round pick. But, I mean, that probably speaks to the fact that he's going to be more ready, right? Like, he's just a B-level prospect. He's going to play maybe in the middle 6 is ultimately your hope. But I mean, that's still a nice toss in there for the Calgary Flames. I'm sure they went. I mean, we need to have at least one player who will definitely be playing here beyond this next year.
Right.
But you got to think between Huberdeau and Weegar, even if neither one of them end up signing with Calgary, I mean, there's 2 more first round picks at minimum. Right, like minimum 2 more first round picks. So
if Brandon Hagel can get 2 first round picks from the Lightning, Jonathan Huberdeau can get at least 2 first round picks.
Yeah, but I mean, Hagel also he's cost protected and a little bit younger.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Huberdeau is,
but you're getting 100-point players. So.
Yes, agreed. Huberdeau is definitely, I would imagine, especially with the cap going up next year, that he's probably going to get somewhere around $10 million. Now, maybe not exactly $10 million, but probably a pretty similar deal to what Gaudreau got. Assuming he has at least a really, really good year, still in the point per game kind of year, then he's going to get $9-10 million next year in free agency. I don't think that's crazy to assume.
Right, and today Jonathan Huberdeau and Weegar came out and said they would be interested in signing long-term deals. Now, whether there's any truth behind that or whether they're literally just saying that to be like, okay, cool, we're happy to be here, so I'm just going to say this. And they, of course, they leave it open by saying we'd be interested. Doesn't mean you're going to actually do it.
Sure, they're interested to see how much money they're willing to give them to stay, right? I mean, and the other thing is that Huberdeau is Canadian, right? Like, and so is Mackenzie Weegar. So I was actually thinking about this as an aside. I'm wondering, as I'll say, maybe the 2 countries become a little more. Not like polarized, but different. At this point, it seems as though, COVID has kind of created 2 very different countries. Whereas like 20 years ago, you'd go, I mean, what's the difference between Canada and the U.S.? Like outside of, they have different money and maybe the economy isn't as strong in terms of my money's not as valuable, but nobody cares. You're getting paid in American dollars anyways. So to me, it's, I'm wondering if it's going to have an effect on players going to Canadian teams. And if those Canadian teams start to say, we need to start making sure the guys that we bring in are Canadian so that they want to stay here because this is where they're from. I'm curious because the 2 guys that left Calgary, both American, and what does the Calgary Flames do in the following deal? Well, they go and they deal for 3 Canadians. And obviously a first round pick. So I wonder if that was on purpose. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely plays a part, right? Because obviously, you hear about guys that want to go home and play for their hometown, right? And maybe that's a ruse, but to me, I think a lot of this has to do with, and feel free to correct me if you disagree or if you think I'm wrong here, but I think a lot of it has to do with taxes, right? So when you play in Florida, right? Sure. Huberdeau is going to miss out on a bunch of money because there's no state taxes in Florida. So
he misses out about I saw it was like $1 million, around $1.3 million, $1.5 million, something like that. Is how much more he would make in Florida.
Right. So as far as federal taxes are concerned in Canada and Alberta, right? So 33% for anything over $220,000 yearly is the federal rate. Now, as far as the Providence rate, it's 15%, anything over $314,000. So that's a lot of taxes coming out for a guy making, almost $6 million. So you got to, assume you're walking home with $3.2 million at that point. And especially when you sign an extension, right? It might cost you a little bit more money to stay in Canada. And for a guy like Tkachuk, I imagine the taxes weren't that big of a deal for a guy like that. I feel like it more or less came down to he wants to just be in America. But when you talk about future RFAs, UFAs, people like that, again, if you're from Canada, you're familiar with that taxing. You're familiar with things like weather and, again, not having, I don't want to say these giant metropolitan areas like a lot of these U.S. cities have. So it's a different lifestyle in a lot of these Canadian cities. And frankly, I mean, outside of Toronto, right? I guess you could say maybe the things like, playing for Original Six, maybe don't have the lure, as they do, for example, like, guys don't need to go out in Canada and find an original six team, right? Because there's already that air and that love of hockey already established there, where in the U.S. you might kind of target that a little bit more, but
I would say
these little factors.
I would say Toronto and Montreal are just in a different stratosphere than any other Canadian team, and that just is what it is. Same with the cities too. I think there's just something different about, especially Toronto, in terms of having that international appeal. But I mean, yeah, it's the same reason why Winnipeg and Edmonton have such a hard time holding on to players. I mean, when you're going to Edmonton, you're like 6 hours, 7 hours away from what's above there. What state is that? It's not as if you're just going to drive across the border like Toronto. Hey, I want to leave. Well, you can get to Buffalo, you can get to Detroit really easily, and you can take that into New York and wherever you want to go. Whereas coming down from Edmonton, you got to drive super far, and then it's not as if you're just driving right into a nice metropolitan city in the U.S. hanging out on the border. Because let's just if my computer would load a little, you're above Montana, right? So then there's no way, you're just not driving anywhere. Like the closest big city in the U.S. is Boise, and that's not close. You're just so far away from everything that you can never drive. And I mean, not that these players are worried about the cost of a flight. By the way, a 16-hour drive from Edmonton to a big city. I guess probably Seattle is a little bit closer. Seattle's probably, I don't know, I'm guessing 13 and a half for Seattle from Edmonton. So there you go.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just so far away from everything. And in some respects, so is Calgary. So it's not as easy to just get around and bounce around to cities and to travel to where your family is. You always have to worry about a border. So I get it. I will tell you my favorite quote from Matthew Tkachuk was, I hate Edmonton, but I hate Tampa Bay more now. I love that.
Yes.
I love that. That's so great.
He's embracing it.
I mean, just thinking of his little rivalry with Drew Doughty, and really at the time when that was going on, it's not as if both teams were really good. So I'm excited for Matthew Tkachuk to get in on that Florida rivalry because both teams are still so good.
Yeah,
he's going to make life hell for the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Right. So here's the other thing for Florida in that rivalry. Right, you talk about it. So two playoffs ago, right, we saw that 6-game series between Florida and Tampa, and you thought, man, this was a best series of the entire playoffs, in my opinion. They come in this year. Florida narrowly escapes, Washington. They were an empty net goal away from, Carl Hagelin basically putting a dagger through them, and they were done. And they come into Tampa, and you figure, okay, cool. You know what? They got rid of that first round demon. They're going to get their shit together. They're going to put on World War III with Tampa here, and they just got ran out of the building. I mean, they got embarrassed. Literally scored 3 goals in all 4 games. And if you're management and Billy Zito, don't get me wrong, Huberdeau would have been great to sign a long-term deal, but you can't possibly come back next year, especially with the limited cap space they have, and say, you know what, we're going to be competitive with Tampa again, going back with the same group, right? Like, you just can't keep coming back with the same group and expect different results. It's just not going to happen. So you have to shake things up. You have to bring in somebody different, I think, and you had to find some sort of different identity, and that's part of the reason why they didn't go back with Andrew Burnett. They brought in Paul Maurice, and, again, Tkachuk is that unicorn. He's got so many tools that, no offense to Huberdeau, he just didn't have, and, honestly, Huberdeau's a much better passer, in my opinion, but it doesn't matter. Like, all the other stuff Tkachuk brings, I think I'd rather have that on my team right now. And so that just helps bring a different identity. And the other great thing is they've got Barkov locked up for another 8 years. They've got, Tkachuk locked up for 8 years. So they can go at this.
Yeah, they're going to be a good team.
For a long time.
The one thing about the Florida Panthers right now is that they have to because of them buying out Keith Yandle. Keith Yandel's cap hit for this year is $5.3 million. So they are paying that, like, that's a huge chunk out of their cap for a team that is going out and signing a Matthew Tkachuk over Huberdeau, which, I mean, almost a $4 million difference between those two salaries this year. It makes it very inconvenient for the Florida Panthers, and now they're going to have to deal someone, and you can't buy anyone out anymore. So I'm wondering what happens with, like, is Patrick Hornqvist? I mean, he seems to be the most obvious answer. He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of this year. He's a $5.3 million cap hit. Trading him would alleviate all your issues. It's just, does anybody want him?
No,
especially at $5.3 million. And it's not like Florida. I mean, he had 28 points in 65 games. You know, it's not as if he's terrible.
No, he could go be a third line guy somewhere, I feel like, but
see, now Florida has to give up maybe a second round pick to get rid of him.
I think it might cost them even more.
They don't have a first round pick.
Well, that's the thing. They don't. Yeah, they don't have one for the next 3 years. And I think if you're a team, right, you want to fleece a first round pick to be able to take. I mean, $5 million is a lot of money to take on with, you know, the salary cap where it is. There's not a whole lot of teams that can do that right now, or at least teams that would be willing to, where they don't want to save their cap space for at the deadline, that sort of thing. But you know, for me, the one piece I actually look at a little bit more likely to get traded, because again, I think Patrick Hornqvist, right, he's going to cost, you know, a first round pick or maybe a second round pick and more, and maybe Florida doesn't want to do that because they don't have a deep prospect pool. To me, I think, you know, and they were rumored to be shopping, you know, last year at the beginning of the offseason, and to me, Bobrovsky looks like the more likely candidate to get dealt here, in my opinion. And you know, honestly, where does he go? That's a good question. You know, that's $10 million that you gotta deal there. So, you know, I assume, you know, wherever they do decide to deal him, if a deal gets done, they got to take something back. And so, you know, who knows, you know, or how that's going to happen. But still, you know, a team like, I don't even know where to point to. I mean, you could look at.
And there's just not a whole lot of teams that can take. I mean, there's almost no one that can just take a straight $10 million off your book. Now I know you said that they would have to take someone else's expensive as well. But the teams that even have a little space to budge, right? Like that would make this move. It almost doesn't make sense for anyone. Like who out there needs Bobrovsky? That obviously they need to have a goalie who is far worse than Bobrovsky, right? Like we're not just talking like, Bobrovsky's a little bit better because he's paid so much. I'm just looking up and down the list. It's not as if there's a ton of teams that are just looking to super upgrade their goaltending position. And
well, let me ask you this. So here's a team I was thinking of, and you know, they've been taking some good strides in the offseason. They bring in a guy like Burakovsky. You know, they get Shane Wright at the draft, and you think, okay, you know, they're not too keen on Philip Grubauer. That's why they went out and got Martin Jones, and you know, Chris Drager's going to be obviously on IR to start the season, from what I understand.
Well, I think that's why they got Martin Jones, not because.
Well, yes, absolutely.
You got to think
maybe if they flip Grubauer back to him, because they don't have to take on as many years as still left on Grubauer's, you know, contract, you think maybe a team like that would be willing to, you know, eat a couple million for the next couple of years.
But then, you know what? When you deal Grubauer to the Florida Panthers and he becomes a Vezina Trophy candidate again, then you just look like an idiot.
Well, sure, absolutely.
I don't think
you
you're
like
willing.
An idiot last year when he was garbage.
Yeah, but I don't think you're willing to give up on him so quickly, especially because Bobrovsky was in the same exact boat when he came to Florida. He had a terrible first year and making $10 million a year. I don't think that I don't think that Seattle is going to want to just give up that cap space. I mean, I guess it's an extra $4 something million. They don't even have that cap space. They're already spending, and they have no players making more than Grubauer at 5.9. It's just they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 players making more than $5 million.
Well, Chris Drager's cap hit's going to go on IR, so that'll alleviate $3.5 million right there. But still,
sure, yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're getting at. They'd
right have to move someone else as well to get under the floor, which they have some deals that they can move, but I don't know if I see the Kraken going out. Like at this point, do we look at the Kraken and say, no, they're probably again going to be pretty like bottom 10 of the league, and that I think they're going to be okay with that. They're going to build that way. They're going to have a team that's relatively competitive, and as these guys' deals come up, they can trade them for picks, and they'll continue to grow their team from there. I don't think they're not trying to go Vegas approach, because it's just not going to work. I mean, you just can't do the lightning in a bottle kind of thing over and over. It's just not going to happen. So they took the typical approach, the slow build approach. And, I guess the one that if I have to pull a couple teams that could make that move for Bobrovsky, I mean, one that comes to mind is kind of the Columbus Blue Jackets. If you could make it work, just send him back. I don't know that he'd want to do that, but the other one, maybe the San Jose Sharks. They haven't had a really good goalie in a long time, and they do have some cap space to work with. And, if you were to just take James Reimer from them, that takes a little penny, and you probably have to figure out something else for him. I mean, geez, what would you have to do? Would you have to just take Vlasic? Trey, what about that?
Ooh.
What about Vlasic for Bobrovsky? You get $3 million in cap space. You also get an okay defenseman, and both guys have 4 years left on their deal, and maybe moving Vlasic into a second pairing, maybe even the third line pairing in Florida. Maybe that kind of rejuvenates him, because he's not the guy who's being required to play all the defense for that back end. So an interesting idea, no doubt.
Yeah, or maybe I don't know who's on his 16-team no trade list, but maybe Chicago wants to take him. They've got $10 million in space, and maybe we get Peter Mrazek in Florida, which would be great. So. Yeah,
and I guess the other, it's next to impossible to move a $10 million contract.
Yeah, at this
with
point,
4 years
it's
left.
hard.
It's why I don't see Florida moving him, especially because you need 2 goalies. I mean, if they dump him, they still need to find another goalie, right? Like,
oh, sure. Yeah, look at San Jose, right? They've got 3 goalies right now. That's why I love your trade proposal, because I'd love to see San Jose with 4 goalies on their roster.
Okay. Well, they would. I would assume they'd send maybe James Reimer back to Florida, which he had some good years in Florida. So
yeah, there you go.
That wouldn't be too crazy to guess, but yeah, Florida's going to have to do something, because they are definitely over the cap, and no one's injured, none of that. So somebody's going to have to move here. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. What other things are we looking at? Oh, we have Pierre-Luc Dubois re-signs with the Winnipeg Jets. 1 year, $6 million. They avoid arbitration. And according to Dubois, I didn't ask for a trade. There was no doubt in my mind I was going to show up for camp. I'm excited to meet the new coaching staff and players.
Oh, yeah, of course. He's not going to demand a trade. That just looks terrible.
Yeah, he's already done it. He did it like a year ago, right?
I know, but it doesn't matter. He signs his qualifying offer, right? He gets that 1 year, and guess what? He can go back and do it again next year for 1 year and then hit free agency. But I think what he's doing is he's putting pressure on management now to say, hey, again, not requesting a trade, but if his agent came out and said that he wants to be in Montreal, right?
Right.
So I'm a firm believer where there's smoke, there's fire, and so. Yes, Pierre-Luc Dubois would be a great centerman that, I'm sure Montreal would love to have. But the question is, does Montreal want him, and do they want to trade for him at this point? Because I'm sure they, again, while they're still planning on tanking or being towards the bottom of the league this year, I still think they, don't want to give up those assets quite yet for a guy like Dubois when they think they can just wait it out.
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, according to what they have right now and like maybe a good timeline, in 2 years, it'd be a great time to scoop them in free agency and not have to give up anything. All right, like you continue to be a bottom team. You're gonna have, I think, in the next 6 months, we're gonna know Carey Price's future, and potentially you're gonna have $10.5 million available to you because he may retire, and if he doesn't, then if I mean, based on what I saw with Carey Price and the way that he was talking, I don't see how that man is gonna be a $10 million goaltender ever again.
No,
I don't know how he's going to be an NHL goalie anymore. But these guys' bodies they're freaks of nature, right? So nothing would ultimately surprise me if Carey Price makes the comeback and he does his thing and he shows back up and he's an average NHL goalie, which would still put him in a very good position. It would put Montreal, frankly, in a position where they might win. They do have a lot of veteran players around this team, so it's not as if they're in a complete tank mode, because I don't know that they know where they're at. Like, you've still got Mike Hoffman, Evgeny Dadonov, you've got a 28-year-old Josh Anderson and Brendan Gallagher, Nick Suzuki signed to a big deal now. Like, this team's kind of in a funny spot. They just signed David Savard last year. I mean, there's a lot of working parts here where they might contend for a playoff spot next year, and it wouldn't be the craziest thing if they were in a position to do so.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they went out and essentially traded a first-round pick and a third-round pick for Kirby Dach as well. So they want to acquire young, talented, players, and so it's not like they're tanking, right? I mean, I agree with you. I think, again, they still have to get Kirby Dach signed, but, I think they want to do what you said, right? They want to go see where they are, see how they compete. Obviously, I don't think they're a playoff team ultimately, but they don't want to also go out and, hit rock bottom again either. I think they're hoping that Brendan Gallagher has a bounce-back season. I think with Kirby Dach potentially playing that second-line center role, I think they're hoping that between him, Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki hopefully getting a little bit better, I think they can go out there and compete in this division here where some of the teams are, you could say maybe are potentially getting a little weaker.
And is there any hope of a Jonathan Drouin return?
Yeah, I mean, you could see him coming back, and I don't, from what I've heard, he's still potentially, I don't know the full injury report, but there's the sentiment that he's going to return at some point this season. So, again, I don't know in what capacity or if they're just going to move on at this point from him. So, but regardless, I think even if you do move him, you'll still get something back in return. And again, you just have to at this point just keep on keeping on. So, I think,
absolutely, there are teams who would take that $5.5 million of Jonathan Drouin and bring it into their fold to see, hey, maybe this guy can have an impact on our team.
And I think a guy like, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, especially if Montreal is willing to hold any of that salary.
Oh, absolutely. And I speaking of salary dumps, I think Evgeny Dadonov is going to feel a little slighted, a little bit, little chip on his shoulder, I think. So he might come out and surprise a lot of people that he still has something left to give.
Yeah, so, and fetch a high draft pick at the trade deadline too, which would be maybe they can do it the right way. Hopefully, they've submitted his no trade thing to them. Yeah,
right.
I don't want to repeat of that. Patrick Laine also signs with the Columbus Blue Jackets a large deal, $8.7 million for the next 4 years. Patrick Laine cashes in, and I'm sure he is all the happiest to accept and to play with Johnny Gaudreau for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you, right?
He'll happily move to the right side.
right.
to accommodate Johnny Hockey.
That's going to be a great tandem, I feel like. And, whomever they get to play center, I think the season they'll start off with Jack Roslovic on that first-line center position. But I think eventually, like I've been singing his praises all offseason, I think Kent Johnson will eventually slide in there at some point. But regardless, I think, if you look at their top 6 wingers, they've got Gaudreau, Laine, Voracek, and Nyquist. That's a fantastic group of wingers to have. And, Nyquist is going to be a UFA at the end of the season. And from what I understand, according to, the insiders and, the reporters from Columbus, that he's very beloved by the fan base, very beloved by the organization. And so it wouldn't shock me if they get some sort of extension done with him, especially now that, Bjorkstrand's out of that organization. They had to move on from him.
That alleviated some cap issues. They're now right at the cap, less than $1 million.
Yeah,
over. So.
I mean, they've got more than 13 forwards. They've got more than 7 defensemen on the roster. So guys will get moved down.
Right.
So things will they'll get under the cap basically is what we're going at. But I think Laine's going to have a really good playmaker on his opposite wing here, a guy who can really dish the puck now. So, hopefully we see a 40-goal scorer Laine here because, if he only puts up a point per game, that $8.7 million will, not be awful, but it's going to look like
got to score some goals. Got to score some goals.
You got to do something more here.
Yeah. And Johnny Gaudreau coming into this team, he's the reason why on our next show we're going to do the top 10 most likely players to break out this next year in the NHL, and he is the reason why one of the first teams I went and looked at were the Columbus Blue Jackets and went, who's going to break out? Like, who's going to benefit the most from Johnny Gaudreau playing all of a sudden, like moving, shuffling everyone around in this lineup? So tune in for that show. I'll answer that question on the next show. But the top 10 breakout players will be our next show. So just wanted to tease that.
I'm excited for that one.
Yeah. As far as the unsigned UFAs, are you surprised that not necessarily like the Nazem Kadri thing? I'm not shocked that nothing's happened because I think he's due. Like, he's still going to get paid, and these teams are figuring out how can we get him onto our team and also pay him. It's not as if he's going to go play somewhere for $4 million. He's going to get
right.
He's going to get paid. Maybe not as much as he had hoped. You have a career high in 87 points, and you probably are like, holy crap, am I going to get $8 million? No, sorry, Naz, you're not going to get $8 million. Not unless if you sign in like Arizona, you might be able to do that. But that's if you want to play in front of 3,000 rowdy fans 41 times a year for the next 3 years. The guys I'm surprised about, Phil Kessel, John Klingberg, even like a Patrick Subban. I'm surprised that they haven't fallen in somewhere. 1 year, $1 million. Not John Klingberg, particularly Kessel and Subban. That type of 1 year, $3 million, whatever. Like those lower, easy deals to make. Why do you think those guys haven't signed anywhere yet?
Well, I think honestly, we talked about a lot of the teams being over the cap limit right now. And again, they might have to do some roster shuffling. A couple of those teams, like we talked about, Columbus or maybe Philly, to get underneath. But I think some of those teams still want to make moves. And I think they're still trying to move pieces out, right? To take advantage, Arizona, Anaheim, they want to, take advantage. They still got to get above the cap floor. They still need to add money.
Yeah,
like Anaheim,
I know.
they need another
$4 million under.
Right. So they want to add pieces, or they're more than willing to add pieces, but they want to, obviously, steal some draft picks from teams to do so. And so I think a lot of these teams right now, it's kind of the waiting game. They're trying to move some pieces around. For example, like I think Kadri, for example, is going back to Colorado and saying, hey, can we make something work here? And so maybe they're trying to move some pieces. Similarly, maybe a team like, for example, that might want some help on the wing. You could look at, a team like Vancouver, right? I think they would like to try to find a way to get better this season. And, going back with the same group is just not, going to be as successful. And so maybe they look at, a guy like Connor Garland or, Oliver Ekman-Larsson. And maybe they're trying to figure out a way to move some of those guys so they can bring in a John Klingberg or somebody else in that forward group to make, to have an impact that maybe they didn't have last year. And so, to me, I think right now it's just a waiting game, right?
But there are teams with cap space. I mean, though, I'd say the one team I'm most surprised with is the New York Islanders. They miss out on Johnny Gaudreau. They really have not done very much at all in this offseason. And when you look, they fire their head coach. They say, they're definitely still in a win now mode. And looking at this team, other than bringing in Alexander Romanov, who also, by the way, is yet to sign as well, this team's really done almost nothing. And you got to think, Nazem Kadri would be a prime type of player to bring into this team. It's a veteran-laden team. They could use another center. I mean, who can't use another center? But Kadri can play the wing too, and so can a lot of their centers. Like Anders Lee, he's probably more suited for the wing position now. You can shift guys around. He would fit nicely into that roster. Oh, and by the way, they only have 4 defensemen signed going into next year. I'm surprised that they have been so quiet for a team that seemingly wants to make the playoffs next year and thinks they still have a team that can compete. That's my thought on that.
Yeah, a team like New York, right? I thought about them too, but I think a guy like, Noah Dobson needs an extension, 51 points last year, right-handed shot. He's going to command a little bit of money, and I think they're still trying to get that worked out at a cap hit that is favorable for them. Lou Lamoriello is going to try to get guys signed on the cheap. There's no doubt. I think they're also trying to work out an extension for Barzal and see what that number is going to cost them. But also, too, I think they might be, like you said, trying to go after some other pieces. So maybe they're trying to see if they can't move a guy like Kyle Palmieri out or see if a team's not willing to take on Varlamov's contract, right, for this season so they can bring in maybe a guy like Phil Kessel on the cheap at like $3-4 million for one season and see what he can do. Because, look, a team like New York has had trouble finding somebody to play on the wing with Barzal. And I know, Phil Kessel, again, he's a little bit older than most of your younger free agents that I think teams would typically target, but he can still skate, he can still pass. And so you saw what he did last year with Clayton Keller. He was still able to keep up and play a really skilled, high-level game. And so I think he would look okay, at least for 1 year with Barzal. But
I'm wondering with Kessel if he doesn't have an offer on the table from the Arizona Coyotes, and he's just saying, "Can I? I want to see if I can sign with a contender and I enjoyed my time there and let me just see." They're not a team that's going to win. I think they're well aware of that. They've got a lot of cap space. It wouldn't shock me if there was an offer on the table for him that he's just waiting to see if he can maybe find a place where he could go win once more. And if he doesn't get that, then he could just re-up in Arizona, and they wouldn't have any problem with that, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think for a guy like, Kadri and Kessel, right, maybe they want, a few more years of term than some teams might be willing to give, right? Because, look, Kessel's 34, Kadri's 31, and if you give Kadri a 7-year deal, he'll be 38, right? And so you don't want to pay him, big money at 38 years old to be a second-line center. It's just the way he plays the game, I don't see him being that productive.
You're looking at a 5-year deal, I think, for him.
Yeah, at the most, absolutely.
Yeah. I usually like that 5-year deal is there because it lowers the cap hit of the previous 4 years, right?
Right.
Who cares? I mean, really, in the life of hockey executives, 5 years down the road, you don't know where you're going to be, anyways. So.
Right. Well, and when's the cap going up in a couple of years too? That cap hit might not be as bad in a couple of years as it would now.
Yep, absolutely. Obviously, the other obvious team for a place like Kadri, we've said it before, and since losing Gaudreau, is the Calgary Flames. And now that they've gone out and gotten Huberdeau, it would be a very attractive. Like, oh, all right, well, sucks I don't get to play with Gaudreau, but I'll go play with Jonathan Huberdeau, who has also just quietly made players a crap ton of money because he just feeds the puck, Kadri would probably score 30, 35 goals again, and the Calgary Flames would be, like, truly, they would be Stanley Cup contenders because that Pacific division is not that good. And with a goaltender, you really could fly through there. You know, they're Edmonton will be very good. They'd be the team to beat. But Markstrom, man, he could steal you a series, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the funny thing is, I mean, we didn't even mention this, but Mackenzie Weegar, he's the 5th highest paid defenseman on that team. But in my opinion, he's the best defenseman on that team. I think he's much more talented than everybody else on that roster as far as, you know, the ability to move the puck out of the zone, you know, produce offense, and he still plays a great two-way game. So,
there was an interview on, I think it was NHL.com, was like an interview with Connor McDavid, and they asked him about the trade, and he actually said, you know, that Mackenzie Weegar is way better than people realize. Like, he's an excellent defenseman. So, yeah.
Well, here's the best part about that. He shoots right, but because Aaron Ekblad's a right-handed shot, he's been playing on the left side most of his career with Ekblad. So now he gets to move over potentially to that right side and shift guys like Anderson and Tanev down the lineup. And so he can play with, you know, a guy like Noah Hanifin or Zadorov and really take advantage of that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, you know, hey, as the off season continues, we'll keep coming back to episodes about what's going on. I expect usually here in the next week, I would expect we're going to hear something, because a lot of these guys in August, it's like, no, we're not doing any work. This is our actual time off. So I think here we'll probably likely hear a few more signings here in the next few days, and then it'll really quiet down. So then we'll just bust out 9 lists a week. You ready for that?
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah.
9 lists. Well, again, join us for our next show as we do the top 10 breakout players of this upcoming season. And until then, we will talk to you guys very soon. Find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. And Justin, you have a great rest of your day.